The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining this webinar, which is our second webinar covering making tax digital for VAT. Our first webinar back in September covered much of the fact and fiction surrounding making tax digital for VAT. And today we're going to focus on the solution that we've delivered for this. And I'm joined today by my colleague, Evan Jones. Today's webinar will be roughly 30 minutes, perhaps a little bit more with questions at the end. So what can you expect from us today? Well, we'll be giving a very brief overview of some of the processes that we highlighted in our first webinar and how you are working with VAT today. We'll then be moving into the demonstration of our solution, and then finally we'll move into the Q&A period. Please do log any questions as we go. We do have a very high number of attendees today, so we'll work to answer some of the common ones that are raised throughout the webinar. And we'll be taking any of those away that we don't get to, and we will provide answers as part of the feedback pack that you'll get following this webinar. So, having a quick look back at what we talked about in our first webinar, what do the VAT processes look like today? We went on a period of research to understand how practices were working with VAT today. And these were some of the key highlights that came out of that. So each practice employee can have subtly different VAT processes depending on their individual portfolio clients. So nothing new there. But from my perspective, my background was in industry. We always had what we called, for want of a better word, a Bible that showed us how to do the VAT return or how to do the bank reconciliations. But actually within practice, it was subtly different because depending on the client, depending on the industry that they were in, or even dependent on the location of that client, could depend on the practices that you were employing to complete those VAT processes. Also, there's a multitude, as you can imagine, a multitude of solutions being used in that process, ranging from manual records being maintained, clients maybe scanning copies of documents and sending that to you. Bookkeeping solutions were obviously used in the process, but the key piece that came out of this whole research was the use of spreadsheets in preparing the VAT return. Now, what we found was bookkeeping software in the main was generally used for more simple cases. So in those more simple cases, you could keep the digital records, you could prepare the VAT return, and you could submit using those bookkeeping solutions. But actually, the HMRC's filing service accounts for 90% of all VAT submissions. So when you look at those two pieces together, we were trying to understand why is that. And actually, there was two common themes that came out of that. One was the use of spreadsheets. So people were taking information out of the bookkeeping solutions, preparing VAT returns in spreadsheets, and submitting using HMRC's online filing service. And also, there was a piece around the feedback that you would receive when making that submission. So yes, you would get some feedback within the bookkeeping solution, but people felt a level of confidence from using that online filing service from HMRC. So they were two of the main reasons we found as to why that figure was so high. Another piece that we covered in the previous webinar was around some of the fact and fiction or the myths that we were hearing within the market around making tax digital for VAT. And like I say, if you didn't attend that webinar, we will send a recording of that round after this, but which will go into this in a bit more detail. But at a high level, I'm going to cover those points now. The first one was that spreadsheets can continue to be used with making tax digital for VAT. So we've heard a lot about whether they can or can't be used, or if they can only be used in the first 12 months. Spreadsheets are here and there's no deadline of when they can be used. If you're using them for digital record keeping, if you're using them for making adjustments, those spreadsheets that you're using today can continue to be used with making tax digital for that. The other piece is you're only required to submit the 9 boxes. So we've heard again a lot in the market that is stating, with making tax digital for VAT, you need to submit the underlying transactions. as well as the 9-box figures. And again, that's incorrect. With Making Tax Digital for VAT, as today, you will only submit the information in the 9 boxes. And again, there's no deadline around that. It's not going to be after 12 months you have to do that. It's only the 9 boxes. The online filing service will remain for those that you have under the threshold or voluntarily registered clients. So again, if you can identify those clients now, they're a pot of customers that you don't have to transition to Making Tax Digital for VAT. If you do transition them to Making Tax Digital for VAT for whatever reason, just be aware that there's no going back for those clients. And the final piece is around the 12-month soft landing period. There's been a lot of confusion around this, but the 12-month soft landing period only refers to the digital links that exist between software products. It doesn't refer to when the underlying transactions are going to have to be submitted with the VAT return, and it doesn't refer to how long spreadsheets can be used. It is literally just HMRC are aware that it might be difficult for all of the software solutions to be digitally linked within those first 12 months, and it's a period of grace for that. So if you do use spreadsheets in the VAT return process, in those first 12 months, you don't necessarily have to have formulas between tabs, for example. But after the 12 months, you will have to have those formulas in place. So let's go straight on to the reason why we're here today, which is to show you our solution for Making Tax Digital for VAT. And I'm going to start this demonstration within the spreadsheet. And this is really important. What you can see here is it's just a basic 9-box VAT return. But the point here is when we set out to build our solution for Making Tax Digital for VAT, the core principle we had was that we wanted you to be able to maintain your processes as closely as possible. And what that first principle meant was that we wanted you to maintain your current spreadsheets. So although this is just a very basic spreadsheet that you can see here, this could have 20 tabs. It could have digital records in there. It could have a bank rec in there. But as long as it's got the 9 boxes of the VAT return and OneClick can identify those 9 boxes, that's all you need. So in some examples that we've seen, box 1 might be on one tab, box 2 might be on another tab. It doesn't matter how them spreadsheets are set up. And the way we do this, and I'll try and explain this in a way, so if I select this cell here, you can see up in the top left-hand corner, as you would expect, that cell is named C7. What we do is we rename the cells that the 9 boxes exist in. So for example, if I go to VAT box 1, you can see we've renamed that VAT B1. VAT box 2 has been renamed VAT B2. And that's a very simple one-off process that you do within this spreadsheet to enable OneClick to be able to read where those boxes exist from. And once that's done, we're ready to go into our OneClick solution. So for those of you who've seen OneClick, you'll recognize this. This is your advisor workspace. And within there, we have our Making Tax Digital toolset, and our Making Tax Digital for VAT functionality resides within here. So if I go into here, the first thing that we will see is a number of dashboards. And the one dashboard we're going to focus on today is the VAT returns dashboard. And within here, we can see who is registered for VAT, who is due to be filed within the next 30 days, how many have been filed by the advisor in the past 30 days, and how many are overdue. Now, this is our first version of our dashboard. The information within this dashboard is coming direct from the data within CCH OneClick itself. This will be transitioned in the next few weeks into a live dashboard that's looking at data direct from HMRC. The dashboard is drillable, and that can take me through to my Making Tax Digital for VAT client list. And you can see across the top here, I can select the area that I want to focus on, and that'll pre-populate the list accordingly. So if I can then search for the client I'm going to be looking at today, I can click on this client. And this will take me straight to the VAT submissions area of the client card. So again, those who are familiar with OneClick will recognize that we now have 2 new areas within VAT. We have the VAT submissions area, and we have the digital VAT account area. In order to set up the client for VAT, we go into our config area, and you can see we now have a VAT registration number option here. I select that, I enter the VAT registration number, and at the point at which I save that VAT registration number, that goes off to HMRC and checks that there's a relationship that exists between the practice and that client. Once that's done, we can go to the VAT submissions area, and this is where we upload that spreadsheet. And you can see within here we have options such as when was the spreadsheet uploaded, who was it uploaded by, what was the period of that VAT return, and what is the submission status. If we go to add return, this is where we load the VAT spreadsheet, and you can see here it's asking us to select the period. This information isn't manually entered by the user. Again, this is going off to HMRC and asking for the date that we're expecting or the period that we're expecting to submit for on behalf of that client. Upload, go straight to that spreadsheet, and when I select open, that is going to run validation on that spreadsheet. So what you can see here is what is the boxes that we're looking at. It's looking for the tags that we had in the spreadsheet and has it found the data and what data is in there. If it's happy with everything that it's found, you'll have a green tick, which shows that this is all successful. If there's any issues, for example, there's an issue with any of the tag namings, it would show across, and that would direct you to where you need to correct the spreadsheet, and it won't upload the VAT return. But this one is fine, and I can select OK. You can see the spreadsheet was successfully uploaded, and it now appears in the list, and we can see the date it was uploaded, who it was uploaded by, the period of the VAT return, and whether it's been submitted. We click into this VAT return, and I can now see the 9-box grid within CCH OneClick, and this is where I can then now potentially reconcile what we originally said with OneClick if we wanted to do that as a reconciliation process. But as long as I'm happy, I can send that return to HMRC, and that submission, as you can see, has been successful. When I go back to the submission screen, you can see that that's now showing as submitted. This little icon here tells me the HMRC submission details. So thinking back to that point around, I want that confidence that this has actually been submitted. When I select on there, I get the receipt ID from HMRC. I also get the timestamp. And we're also in the process of adding a PDF option here as well, so you can save that or print that if that's what you so wish. The other option we have here is when you upload the spreadsheet, it uploads the spreadsheet in its entirety into OneClick. So it gives you a storage mechanism for those VAT calculations. And at any point in time, I can go and I can click to download that spreadsheet, and that'll give me a view of what those workings were. The other piece that we have within the OneClick solution is what we call the digital VAT account. This is an area that looks directly at HMRC's APIs, and that will provide you with information of where your client is in the process. So for example, what submissions have been made, what liabilities are outstanding, when payments are due. And you can see here that we have a period here, a VAT return with an amount, a liability due. There's nothing outstanding. It was due on the 9th of June. There is other APIs available that we are adding as we go, which says things such as when was something paid. But yes, that's a direct link to HMRC's APIs. So for example, if you do have clients that you have relationships with, but you don't necessarily submit on behalf of, and they're potentially submitting returns themselves, you could use this as a mechanism to view their VAT progress. So in terms of our solution, it's as simple as that. We've really tried to look at the processes that you have today and try and particularly with the use of spreadsheets, and try and mirror those solutions as closely as possible. And the big difference is, rather than manually entering those numbers into HMRC's system, you will upload those into OneClick and submit directly from there, which meets that digital link and this digital submissions to HMRC requirement. One other point that we wanted to raise is that when we went round and did our research, a lot of practices, like I mentioned, had discussed that they don't have this consistent process for completing VAT returns. And when we went back to those customers and showcased our solution, they did start to think about, well, actually, could this be a way of creating that consistent solution across the practice? So if I am using bookkeeping solutions, and there is a small number that we actually submit on behalf of, is there an option there to actually say, for that extra step of exporting the VAT return into a spreadsheet and then submitting via OneClick, for that extra simple one step, could we create a consistent process across the practice for all clients? So it was just something that we wanted to highlight as part of this also. The other piece that we wanted to cover was how you are monitoring your VAT cases today. So we've just come off the back of a lot of roadshows. We toured the country, we showcased this solution, and one of the things that we were talking about in them roadshows was how customers were monitoring VAT cases today. And what came out loud and clear was probably 50–60% of you today are keeping those monitoring of cases in spreadsheets today. And as we transition to making tax digital for VAT, is this an opportunity to think about how we can refine those processes? So we've talked about the live dashboard that'll exist within CCH OneClick. So that's going to bring in HMRC data continually. There's no alert within that currently, but it's definitely something that we're looking into. So perhaps that's one way of monitoring VAT cases. Spreadsheets, like I mentioned, so that's possibly your existing method and it works. But it's not automated and there's no alert, and there's probably a lot of manual intervention that has to go on within there. Other options, so do you use HMRC's system at the moment, or are you using individual bookkeeping solutions? But the point here is if you're using multiple solutions, you're not going to get a single view of all of your VAT cases. And the final option here is around CCH Central Workflow. So within Central, we have a VAT template where you can create tasks and you can create alerts for deadlines, and it can be used as a single VAT reporting solution. So in that point, I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Evan Jones, who's going to explain how CCH Central Workflow can support you with your VAT processes.
Okay. Morning, everyone. Apologies for that. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay just now. Okay, so when I was in practice, VAT returns and virtually every other process within the firm was all managed within Excel. Typically, you'd have some kind of Excel worksheet with maybe clients running down side, and then probably the tasks running across the top. So you might have things such as request data, prepare a return, get it reviewed, etc. And then we would simply just put an X in each of those cells to indicate that a task had been completed, or possibly might put in a date just to give that little bit of extra information. Now, one problem with that was that different people within the firm had their own processes. And so the Excel spreadsheets could differ from each other. So there wasn't consistent columns, there weren't consistent processes being followed. And another problem that we had was that there was no single place from which a partner or manager could see the status of all their jobs. So when they wanted to see where all of their clients were up to, someone would have to collate all of these different Excel spreadsheets and then email them across to that person. Now, of course, that then brings an added issue of by the time the person opens up that email to look at the information in there, that information is already out of date because things have moved on. One of the options that we have on here that Phil was talking about is to use CCH Workflow, and that's something that we implemented in our firm. So firstly, what is a workflow? So at its most simple, workflow is just about defining a process. Now, if you're using Excel to manage your jobs, you actually already defined your process. Your steps going across the top are all of the steps that people have to follow. So where is a workflow different from Excel? Well, with our workflow, you can build in some simple logic into that process. So if you imagine we're at the step where maybe the return has been prepared and it's then being reviewed, there are two outcomes from that. Either the review goes okay, the information is good, and it can then be passed on to the client to authorize, or there are some changes that need to be made, and so we need to go back a step to re-prepare that information. With CCH Workflow, as each step becomes active within a process, it creates a task for the relevant staff member. So each of those steps can be given to a different person within the firm if needed. The other thing with this workflow that I'm going to show you in a moment is that from a staff point of view, you get a task list from which you can see all of the tasks that you need to complete, regardless of where they have come from, whether from a workflow, a separate workflow, or an ad hoc task you've been given. And from a review point of view, you then have a single screen from where you can track the progress of all of your VAT returns. So let's take a look at the software just now. So for those of you already using Central, hopefully this looks like a familiar screen. All I've got here is one of my home pages with the VAT workflow being shown. So I have two clients listed on here, and you can see that going across the top here are my steps, which is similar to what you would have in your Excel spreadsheet. To progress a step from here, all I have to do is right-click and complete that step. You'll see that the workflow then moves on to the next step, and we'll keep going all the way through. I can also do this from my task list. So if we go to my task list here, you'll see Richard's Industries in a moment. When I go to my task list here, I have two tasks, one which is coming from the workflow and another which is an ad hoc task that I've been given. The first client that we looked at there, RM Enterprises, is not listed on my tasks because that client actually belongs to somebody else. You saw that I was able to progress the tasks on the client that is not one I'm responsible for. That's a choice for the practice as to whether you allow that or not. So if I look at my own task here and click onto the subject, and that just opens up my task. A couple of things I can do from here. I could either reassign this task and give it to somebody else if they're going to be completing that for me, or I can just click on the completed button just up here, And what that will do is complete that step. It then gives me the next task that I need to do. And I can pass that. If we go back and look at that return here, you'll see that that has then progressed this step on. Okay, so those are the two different ways in which I can progress the steps on a workflow. What I'm going to show you on here, if I just follow this one all the way through to the end, and I'm going to say that I'm going to file the return. Now what happens here is that once I've filed the return, this job automatically rolls forwards and creates the next quarter that I'm going to be preparing. So once you've added a client onto this list, you never need to worry about adding them again. They will always be on this list and no one will ever get missed. What I've also done here in this workflow, you'll see that after the job is rolled forward, I then got a final step here for me to complete. We've done that because typically in most practices, once you've filed a return, you may then have a process you go through. It could be sending some information to the client or possibly information internally. Maybe you send a bill. But once I complete this final step, you'll see that that job then disappears from this list. So this list is not something which is going to be an ever-growing list. It's simply going to show you the jobs that you need to work on. So that's how to progress a workflow once it's been added. The other thing I want to show you is how do you add that to a client in the first place. So as a one-off, I'm just going to go into this client and I go to my assignments tab. For those of you using the software already, you'll be aware the assignments are the services or the types of work that we provide to the client. This particular workflow sits against the VAT assignment. So all I'm going to do is click into here and add the VAT assignment. Usual kind of things that I could specify which partner or manager looks after this service or which office to which it belongs. That's now added, and also as a one-off, I'm then going to create a job on here. If I click into the job field up here, you'll see that I've selected that the VAT assignment works on a quarterly basis, and so the names are predefined for me. What you're able to do within the software is set a default, perhaps quarterly, and then on individual clients, once the VAT assignment's been added, you can specify that it may be either monthly or annual, depending on the particular client. So I'm going to pick Q4, runs from 1st of October to end of December. Other usual kind of things we could put in here, we could start putting in budgets for hours and work in progress and fees as well. Finally, the last thing I need to do is just to add workflow onto that job. So if I click to add the workflow, say OK. And if I now go back to my home page here, you'll see that that client has now been added to that list. Now, adding the assignment and the job, those are one-off processes. If you already use our practice management time and fees software, then you'll probably already have the VAT assignments sitting on your clients. For those of you already using the software, you'll be aware that we have the bulk update tool, which will allow you to add VAT assignments and jobs to clients en masse. So that's how easy it is to add an assignment onto a client and to start the workflow and to progress the workflow from within there. One last thing that I will show you are some of the things that you can do to customize those workflows. So within here, you'll see we have the step type. Now, all of the steps that I had in that workflow were the most basic step type, which is called a central task. And what that allows you to do is just simply to tick off a step and say that it's either complete or to say that it's no good. You'll also see here that at step number 8, I had a job roll forward task. So that's what caused the next VAT return to be automatically created. On this same screen, if you look across to one of the final columns that says next step, and if we look down at, say, step number 6, confirm with clients, you'll see there are 2 possible outcomes. And this is the logic that I was mentioning. So once we confirm with the client either is happy with that, in which case we can move on and we can file that return, or the client says that changes need to be made, in which case this would then loop back to the prepare return stage. Other things that you can do to customize the individual steps. So at the first bit where we have the steps, a workflow overall has a start and end date of when that needs to be delivered. Steps within that can also have their own dates as to when they need to be started, and you can specify how long should be allowed for a particular step to be completed. You'll see that you can also allocate this step to a particular responsibility. So in my example, I had that set up to be the partner. You could, of course, have steps set to be assigned to the managers or team members. There are also the ability to define what are the possible outcomes. So is this a simple tick and simply move on to the next step? Or is this something where it could be a pass or fail? And down at the bottom, you'll see that based on those outcomes, I can then move the workflow onto the appropriate step. For those of you already using our software, workflow is already included, and the VAT template that I've shown you just now already exists within the software. We've got documentation which we sent out after the webinar that guides you through exactly what I've shown you just now. Thanks very much, Phil. I'm going to pass back to you now.
Thank you, Evan. So, in summary, what are we advising? So if you're typing figures into HMRC's filing service today because you're using spreadsheet, well, I hope today has shown you that you can use CCH OneClick to provide you with that ability to maintain your processes as closely as possible with the transition to making tax digital for VAT. Do you use bookkeeping products today to file VAT returns for all or just some of your clients? Well, we feel this is all about choice. So if this works for you and your clients today, continue to use those same solutions if they work today. But CCH OneClick can be used as a single solution that can take data from these multiple bookkeeping solutions via spreadsheets to HMRC, or perhaps it's a combination of both. Are you using a spreadsheet today to keep track of your VAT filing? So thinking about what Evan's just gone through, again, this is all about choice. So continue with that manual process if that's what your practice is happy with. Utilize the dashboards perhaps within OneClick that we've discussed to keep track of those VAT deadlines. Or start thinking about how you could utilize the workflow and the VAT tool within CCH Central. Or again, how about a combination of all three? So what's next? So for CCH OneClick users, the solution is available now. We are currently hand-holding a number of our customers through this the VAT pilot process at the moment, and we are making submissions at the moment as well to HMRC. We've had a number of successful submissions now. In the next couple of weeks, we'll be rolling this out more widely, but it is available within the software now. If you're not using OneClick, please do just speak to your account manager and they can give you more information, particularly around pricing. We would recommend joining HMRC's VAT pilot. And if you are part of the VAT pilot and you want to make some submissions through OneClick, the submissions element of OneClick will be free of charge until April 2019 when it goes live with HMRC. Finally, from us, when you're using our VAT solution, it's great to hear your feedback as well. So if you are part of the pilot and you are getting on board with OneClick and using our VAT solution, we'd really appreciate that feedback. And I suppose now it's just time for any questions. So like I mentioned at the start of this webinar, we have a lot of people on the call and we have received a lot of questions. I'm going to try and get through as many of the most common ones as possible. What we'll then do is we take a download of all the questions, we'll answer those offline, and then we'll send the answers following this webinar with the pack that you get following this. So I'll just try and make my way through the list that I can see at the moment. So the first question we've had a number of times is this tool only available for practices? Well, it's available for both practices and our users in industry who use CCH Central. Within OneClick, we have what we call the advisor and the client workspace, and currently submissions are made through the advisor workspace, but we are currently developing our client-side solution. So what that means is if you are in practice and you have clients who are using spreadsheets or submitting themselves, they will be able to use OneClick through their own client workspace to submit VAT returns using their own credentials. And that's something that's in development now. Is this available now? Yep, so we talked about, the VAT functionality was launched in October within OneClick. And like I say, we are hand-holding customers through that process who are currently on board with the HMRC pilot. And like I say, within the next couple of weeks, that'll be available more widely. But if you are interested and you have OneClick currently and you're interested in getting involved in the HMRC pilot immediately, please do just reach out to us and we can start that process. Have we made any submissions yet? Yes, we like I say, we've got this group of customers who we're working with and we are making successful submissions. Another question is around, can I use my existing spreadsheets or will you be providing a template? So when we talked about that spreadsheet that I showed, I think the key principle for us was we didn't want to have to provide you with templates. We wanted you to, if you're using spreadsheets today, continue using those spreadsheets. So no, we won't be providing a template. The key is that you're using them spreadsheets and OneClick will be able to read those spreadsheets through the cell naming. And that cell naming process, it is very simple, but we do have all of the guides on how to do that within our support site. So within the support site, if you go into the OneClick area into Making Tax Digital, you'll find all of the quick start guides for VAT, and it tells you very clearly how to get ready for setting up not only OneClick itself for VAT, but also how to set up the spreadsheet. How do I get involved in the pilot is another question. So HMRC have a lot of support materials around this. It is an HMRC process. Obviously, we can guide some way towards that. But what I will do is when we send around the pack after this, I'll send any links that HMRC have around how you can get on board with that pilot. I've got a couple here for you, Evan. Might be ones that you've already covered, but it might be worth going over it again. First one is, how do I get started with the workflow template shown today?
Okay, good question. So the template already exists within the software, file maintenance, central workflow, and it's called VAT returns. So the stuff that I showed on screen where I was explaining the central task and things like that, that template already exists within the software. So that's already there for you. There's a PDF that we have that just walks through all of this. Have a look at that, and you're able to get started straight away.
Great, Evan. While you're on there as well, I've got another one. Do my clients need to be in Central?
Okay, yes, good question. So there will need to be client records in Central. If you don't have all of your VAT clients in Central, there is a self-import spreadsheet. Literally, all you need to do is populate a client code and a name, and you can, and that's kind of the bare bones for a client record. So you can do that in Excel and just import that straight into Central. And from there, you've then got the bulk update tool for putting on a VAT assignment and adding those jobs. So yes, they will need to be in there, but we have got simple, easy to use tools to get records in there nice, quickly and efficiently.
Great, thanks. And the last question that we've had is around the pricing for OneClick. What we're going to do is we're going to send all the details on pricing in this pack that follows the webinar, because that'll be easier, I think, for everyone to go through that there. So that's what we'll cover today. Any questions I haven't got to, we'll, like I say, we'll answer them offline and it'll be sent in your pack. It's just time to say thank you very much for joining us on this webinar. We hope you found it useful. We hope it's given you some food for thought. You've probably seen on the last slide, my email address is there. Any questions that you have, feel free to contact me. And finally, if you have any other questions or any other, if you want to have a look at anything else, please do visit our website. Thank you very much for your time, and I'll speak to you all soon.